I'm Alara, 28 female. I live in a penthouse apartment that overlooks the city skyline, a view I purchased with years of sleepless nights and relentless determination. My company, a sustainable skincare brand I built from nothing, has offices on 3 continents. To the world, I'm a success story. To my family, for the last 8 years, I've been nothing more than a ghost, a cautionary tale they told their friends about the daughter who threw her life away. They called me the ugly college dropout, a failure they were ashamed of, and they cut me out of their lives as cleanly as you'd snip a loose thread. They never imagined that the thread they snipped would one day be strong enough to hang them by their own pride. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up in the Vance household was like living in a perfectly curated museum where I was the single, glaring imperfection. Our home was a monument to my mother's obsession with appearances. Meredith Vance didn't just sell high-end real estate, she lived it. Every piece of furniture was strategically placed, every family photo was professionally taken, and every achievement was polished and put on display for the world to admire. In this pristine environment, my younger sister, Kasia, was the masterpiece. She was born with the sunny blonde hair and easy smile that our mother prized. She glided through life, collecting accolades as effortlessly as she breathed. Ballet trophies, debate team victories, honor roll certificates, they all lined the shelves of our living room, each one a testament to the family's success. Kasia was the golden child, the reflection of everything my mother wanted the world to see. And then there was me. I was the rough draft, the awkward sketch shoved in a drawer. I had my father's darker hair and a more reserved nature. Where Kasia was gracefully social, I was introspective and often lost in my own world of books and creative projects. My mother interpreted my quietness as sullenness, my creativity as a lack of focus. From a young age, the comparisons were constant and brutal. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" was the soundtrack of my childhood. At dinner parties, Kasia would be paraded around to charm our parents' friends, while I would be reminded to stand up straight and try to smile for once. It wasn't that my parents were overtly cruel in those early years. It was a more insidious kind of neglect. I was simply less important, less valuable, less loved. The pressure cooker truly heated up when we reached high school. Kasia was the popular cheerleader and class president, destined for an Ivy League school. I was more interested in my art classes and the small business I tried to start on the side, selling handmade jewelry online. My mother saw this as a frivolous waste of time. My grades were good, but they weren't Kasia-level perfect. I wasn't aiming for Harvard or Yale. I was aiming for a state university with a good arts program. This was a source of deep disappointment for my mother. She had a vision for her daughters. Kasia, the brilliant lawyer, and me, well, she hoped I might at least marry a successful doctor to make up for my own perceived shortcomings. My interest in art was an embarrassment, a sign that I lacked the ambition to be a proper Vance. The real conflict began when it was time for college. My mother, with the silent compliance of my father, had already mapped out my future. I was to enroll in the pre-law program at the same prestigious university Kasia was aiming for a few years later. The fact that I had zero interest in law was irrelevant. "It's a respectable profession, Alara," she would say, her voice clipped and final. "It will give you security. This art nonsense is a hobby, not a career." I tried to argue, to show her my business plan for my jewelry, the small but steady profit I was making. She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be ridiculous. You're going to be a lawyer." My father, a man who had long ago learned that disagreeing with my mother was a futile effort, just nodded along. "Your mother knows best," he'd murmur, not meeting my eyes. So I went. I enrolled in a program that felt like a foreign language, surrounded by ambitious, competitive students who thrived on the pressure that was crushing me. I spent my days reading dense legal texts and my nights feeling a part of my soul wither. My only solace was my grandmother, June. She was my mother's mother, but they were polar opposites. Grandma June was warm, eccentric, and the only person who ever saw my creative spark as a gift, not a flaw. She'd call me every weekend. "How are you holding up, Starlight?" She'd ask, her voice a comforting balm. I'd confess my misery, how I felt like I was suffocating. She was the only one Oh, listened. Don't let them dull your shine, Alara, she'd tell me. That light inside you is special. Meanwhile, Kasia was thriving. Her high school career was a string of perfect scores and glowing recommendations. My parents were already planning her acceptance party to a top-tier law school. Every conversation I had with them inevitably turned into a lecture disguised as a comparison. Kasia is already networking with professors, my mother would announce proudly. You need to be more proactive, Alara. Are you joining any of the pre-law societies? When I'd try to tell them about a painting I was working on, my mother's eyes would glaze over. That's nice, dear, but have you started studying for your midterms? The message was clear. My passions were worthless. Only the path they had chosen for me held any value. The small jewelry business I tried to keep running from my dorm room was discovered during a surprise visit from my mother. She found my box of supplies and gave me a look of such profound disappointment that it felt like a physical blow. You are wasting your father's hard-earned money on this craft project, she'd said, the words dripping with disdain. She insisted I shut it down immediately to focus on my real future. I felt a piece of myself break that day. I was living a life that wasn't mine, and the person I was supposed to be was fading away. The setup wasn't just about my family's preferences, it was a systematic erasure of my identity. They weren't just raising a daughter, they were trying to sculpt me into a replica of my sister, and every part of me that didn't fit the mold had to be chiseled away. I was the unwanted daughter, a problem to be solved, a disappointment to be managed. The foundation for the betrayal was being laid, brick by painful brick, and I was too young and too broken to see it coming. The breaking point arrived during the spring semester of my sophomore year. The weight of the pre-law curriculum had become unbearable. I was failing a critical course, not from a lack of intelligence, but from a complete and utter lack of passion. The thought of spending one more day pretending to care about torts and contract law felt like a prison sentence. The creative spark that Grandma June had always encouraged was flickering, on the verge of being extinguished completely. I realized that if I didn't do something drastic, I would lose myself forever. I would become a hollowed-out version of the person my mother wanted me to be, a ghost haunting a life I never chose. After weeks of agonizing deliberation, I made a decision. I was going to drop out. I drove home that weekend, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had a new plan. I wanted to enroll in a community college to take business and graphic design courses, to properly learn how to turn my creative passions into a viable enterprise. I had a folder filled with research, business models, and a heartfelt speech rehearsed in my head. I thought if I could just make them understand, if I could present it as a logical, alternative path to success, they might listen. I was so naive. I found them in the living room, the museum. My mother was on the phone, no doubt closing a deal on a multi-million-dollar property, while my father read the newspaper. Kasia, home from a weekend trip, was polishing one of her many debate trophies. The air was thick with the usual sterile perfection. I took a deep breath and began. Mom, Dad, Kasia, I need to talk to you about something important. My mother ended her call with a perfunctory goodbye and turned to me, her expression already impatient. What is it, Alara? I'm very busy. My carefully rehearsed speech dissolved into a nervous tumble of words. I'm not happy in the pre-law program. It's not for me. I'm failing and I'm miserable. I've decided to withdraw from the university. A heavy silence descended upon the room. My father lowered his newspaper, his eyes wide. Kasia stopped polishing her trophy, a smirk already playing on her lips. My mother's face, however, was terrifying. It went from impatience to disbelief, then morphed into a cold, hard fury I had never seen directed at me with such intensity. You're what? She hissed, the words low and dangerous. You're throwing away $100,000 education because you're not happy. I tried to show her my folder to explain my plan for community college for building a real business. It's not throwing it away, it's redirecting my path. I have a plan, a real one this time. She didn't even glance at the folder. She slapped it out of my hand, sending papers scattering across the pristine hardwood floor. A plan? You call this a plan? Going from a prestigious university to a community college for dropouts and failures. You are embarrassing this family. Her voice rose with every word, echoing through the cavernous room. We have sacrificed for you, we have given you every opportunity, and you are spitting in our faces. My father tried to interject, a weak now Meredith, but she silenced him with a venomous glare. Kasia, seeing her opportunity, chimed in, her voice dripping with mock concern. Ilara, don't be so dramatic. Everyone finds college hard. You just need to try harder. Don't ruin everything for everyone just because you can't handle a little pressure. The condescension was infuriating. This isn't about pressure, Kasia. This is about my life. I shot back, my voice trembling. That's when my mother delivered the words that would sever our relationship forever. She stepped closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and disgust. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple jeans and t-shirt, my messy ponytail, my pale, stressed face. Look at you, she sneered. You don't have what it takes. You're not like your sister, you're just a disappointment, an ugly college dropout. That's all you'll ever be. The word ugly wasn't just about my appearance. It was a judgment on my very soul, on my dreams, on my existence. It was the confirmation of every insecurity she had cultivated in me for years. In that moment, something inside me shattered, but something else hardened in its place. The hurt was so profound it felt like a physical wound, but beneath it, a cold, clear resolve began to form. If that's what you think of me, I said, my voice quiet but steady, then there's nothing left to say. I turned to leave, to go pack my things from the room that had never truly felt like mine. Her next words stopped me in my tracks. Where do you think you're going? If you walk out on this family and this opportunity, you are not welcome back. You will be on your own. We will not support a failure. You will get nothing. Do you understand me? You will be cut off. It wasn't a threat, it was a verdict. My father just sat there, buried behind his newspaper again, a coward in his own home. Kasia watched with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. This was perfect for her. With me gone, the spotlight of our parents' approval would be hers and hers alone. I looked at their faces, one filled with rage, one with smug satisfaction, and one with utter spinelessness, and I knew I was already an orphan. I didn't bother going to my room. I turned around, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. I got in my old car, the one I'd bought with money from my forbidden jewelry business, and drove. I had no idea where I was going, only that I was leaving the museum and its cold, perfect exhibits behind for good. The last thing I heard was the sound of my mother's voice on the phone, presumably calling relatives to share the shameful news of her dropout daughter. The betrayal wasn't just in her words. It was in the swift, surgical precision with which they amputated me from the family. I was no longer a Vance. I was just an ugly college dropout, cast out into the world with nothing but a broken heart and a terrifyingly empty future. The first few months after being cast out were a blur of cheap motels, instant noodles, and annoying, hollow loneliness. The reality of being completely on my own was a brutal shock to the system. Every time my phone buzzed, a part of me would hope it was my father, or even my mother, having had a change of heart. But the calls never came. The silence from my family was absolute, a testament to how easily I had been erased. I was 20 years old, with a few $100s to my name and a car that sounded like it was on its last legs. The world suddenly felt vast and unforgiving. I ended up in a small, run-down apartment in a city a few hours away, a place where no one knew the Vance name. I found a job waiting tables at a Greasy Spoon diner, the kind of place where the coffee was perpetually burnt and the tips were barely enough to cover rent. The work was grueling, a world away from the manicured lawns of my university campus. My hands, once accustomed to holding paintbrushes and delicate jewelry pliers, were now chapped and sore from carrying heavy plates and scrubbing dirty tables. At night, I'd lie awake on my lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and the weight of my mother's words would come crashing down on me. Ugly college dropout. Failure. The labels echoed in the darkness, threatening to become my reality. There were moments I almost broke. I'd see a family laughing together in the diner, and a wave of grief so powerful would hit me that I'd have to retreat to the kitchen to compose myself. I was grieving the family I thought I had. The love I now realized was entirely conditional. The only lifeline I had was Grandma June. A week after I left, a letter arrived at the post office box I'd rented. Inside was a handwritten note and $500 in cash. "Starlight," she wrote, "never let anyone, not even your own mother, tell you what you are worth. Your light is brighter than they can comprehend. This isn't much, but it's a start, don't you dare give up, call me when you can." Her faith in me was the one flickering candle in my suffocating darkness. I used her money to buy a used laptop and pay for an internet connection. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't wait tables forever. I started taking free online courses in marketing and web design, spending every spare moment I had in the local library, devouring books on business and entrepreneurship. I was adrift, but I was learning to swim. The discovery, the spark that would change everything, didn't come in a flash of lightning. It came quietly, born out of my own necessity. The harsh soaps and long hours at the diner were wrecking my sensitive skin. My face was constantly breaking out, and my hands were dry and cracked. I couldn't afford the expensive skincare products my mother and sister swore by, so I started researching natural alternatives. I fell down a rabbit hole of herbal remedies, botanical oils, and the science of skincare. I remembered spending time with Grandma June in her garden as a child, how she'd make salves from calendula and lotions from chamomile. Driven by a mix of desperation and curiosity, I started experimenting in my tiny, cramped kitchen. I used my meager savings to buy raw ingredients: shea butter, jojoba oil, essential oils, and various clays. I spent weeks testing and tweaking formulas, creating simple, natural products that began to heal my own irritated skin. I developed a gentle cleansing balm that melted away the grease from the diner without stripping my skin, and a rich, nourishing hand cream that started to soothe my chapped hands. It was the first thing in months that felt like my own, a small act of creation in a life that had been defined by destruction. One of my coworkers at the diner, a kind older woman named Maria, noticed the change. "Your skin is looking so much better, honey. What's your secret?" she asked one day. Hesitantly, I showed her the small, unlabeled jar of cream I carried in my apron. I gave her some to try. A week later, she came back, raving. Her hands, also worn down by years of service work, were softer than they'd been in years. She offered to buy a jar from me. Then she told another waitress, who told a customer, and soon I had a small, word-of-mouth operation running out of my apartment. I was making an extra $50 a week, then $100. That was the spark. It wasn't about making a fortune. It was about solving a real problem that I, and people like me, faced. The high-end beauty industry, the one my mother and Kasia participated in, was built on exclusivity and impossibly expensive products. It catered to women who had never worked a day of manual labor in their lives. My products were for the Marias of the world. They were for people who needed something that worked, that was gentle, that was affordable, and that was made with care. With a surge of purpose I hadn't felt since before college, I used my laptop to build a simple e-commerce website. I taught myself product photography, using natural light from my apartment window and pieces of cardboard as backdrops. I designed my own labels, drawing on the artistic skills my mother had dismissed as a useless hobby. I named the brand Aura, a nod to the inner light that Grandma June always told me I had. My first official online sale felt more significant than any grade I had ever received in college. It was proof that I could create something of value, that my ideas weren't just nonsense, that I wasn't the failure they had branded me. The darkness hadn't disappeared overnight. I was still lonely, and the scar from my family's rejection was still raw. But now there was a pinprick of light in the distance, and it was growing brighter. It was a light I had created myself, fueled not by a desire for revenge, but by a desperate, fundamental need to build a life of my own. I was no longer just a dropout waiting tables. I was a founder. I was an entrepreneur. I was taking the broken pieces of the life they had shattered and beginning to build something new, something stronger, something that was entirely, unapologetically mine. The transition from a kitchen counter hobby to a legitimate business was a grueling, uphill battle fought entirely in the shadows of my old life. For the next 8 years, I lived a double life. To the world I was slowly building, I was Alara Vance, the founder of Aura Skincare. But in the context of my past, I was a non-entity, a ghost who had vanished without a trace. This secrecy was a conscious choice. I knew that any hint of my burgeoning success would bring my family sniffing around, not out of love, but out of a sense of ownership or a desire to control the narrative. My success had to be mine and mine alone, untainted by their influence. The first few years were the hardest. I worked 18-hour days, waiting tables from dawn until late afternoon, then coming home to mix batches of product, package O. Orders and answer customer emails until I collapsed into bed. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every dollar I earned from the diner, after covering my basic living expenses, was poured directly back into Aura. I moved out of the rundown apartment and into a slightly larger one that had a second bedroom, which I immediately converted into a dedicated lab and shipping station. I bought better equipment, sourced higher quality, sustainable ingredients, and invested in professional branding. My investigation wasn't into my family, it was into the world of business. I became a relentless student. I used my library card like a backstage pass, checking out every book on marketing, finance, and supply chain management. YouTube became my university, teaching me everything from SEO optimization to negotiating with suppliers. I treated my business like a complex puzzle, and I was determined to solve it. I made countless mistakes. An early batch of face cream was ruined because I miscalculated the preservative. I once spent my entire marketing budget on an ad campaign that yielded 0 sales. Each failure was a painful, expensive lesson, but I refused to let them stop me. Each setback only fueled my resolve. My first real breakthrough came from a blog post. A small, independent beauty blogger with a loyal following bought one of my products, a calming facial serum, and wrote a glowing review. She praised the simple, effective ingredients and the affordable price point. The post went viral in her small community. That night, my website received more orders than it had in the previous 6 months combined. I stayed up for 48 hours straight, fulfilling every single one, my hands aching but my heart soaring. It was the first external validation that I was on the right track. This small taste of success made me bolder. I quit my job at the diner to focus on Aura full-time. It was a terrifying leap of faith. I secured a small business loan using a meticulously detailed business plan that I had spent months perfecting. The loan officer, a stern-looking woman who reminded me a little of my mother, grilled me for over an hour. But my passion and my numbers were undeniable. She approved the loan. I used the money to rent a small workshop space and hire my first employee, Maria from the diner, who was looking to retire from waitressing. She became my head of production, her steady, reliable hands proving just as adept at bottling serums as they were at carrying plates. Throughout all this, my only contact with my family was through Grandma June. We spoke on the phone once a month. I never told her the full extent of my success, only that I was doing okay and had started a small business. I didn't want to put her in an awkward position with my mother, but she could hear the change in my voice, the growing confidence and sense of purpose. Every year on my birthday, a card would arrive with $100 and the same message: "Keep shining, Starlight." I saved every single one. I also sent her money, discreetly at first, then in larger amounts as Aura grew. I told her it was a return on her initial investment, but we both knew it was more than that. It was my way of taking care of the one person who had ever taken care of me. As Aura expanded, I kept a low profile. I used my middle name, Faye, on some of the company's legal documents to avoid flagging the Vance name. We grew from a small online shop to a brand carried in independent boutiques across the country. We gained a reputation for authenticity and ethical sourcing. We were the antithesis of the massive, soulless corporations that dominated the beauty industry. After 5 years, Aura was making 7 figures in annual revenue. I hired a proper team, moved into a real office, and finally started paying myself a decent salary. It was around this time that I first indulged in a bit of clandestine investigation of my own. Curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up my family online. My mother was, as expected, a top real estate agent in her firm, her professional photo beaming with polished success. My father was a partner at his accounting firm, and Kasha was a star. Her university's website was filled with articles about her moot court victories and her position as editor of the Law Review. She was a golden child, polished to a blinding sheen. There was a family photo in an alumni magazine taken at a university gala. My parents stood on either side of Kasha, their faces glowing with pride. It was as if I had never existed. There was a pang of the old hurt, but it was distant now, like the echo of a long-forgotten song. They looked happy in their perfect, curated world, a world that had no place for me. The final phase of my secret empire building was the most significant. A large, international beauty conglomerate approached me with a buyout offer. They wanted Aura's brand authenticity to add to their portfolio. My team advised me to take the deal. It was a life-changing amount of money, but I refused to sell the company I had bled for. Instead, I negotiated a strategic partnership. They would handle our international distribution and manufacturing, while I would retain full creative control and majority ownership. The deal made me, on paper, a multi-millionaire overnight. I moved into the penthouse, but my life didn't change much. I still worked tirelessly, driven by the same passion that had sparked in my tiny apartment kitchen. The secret was complete. I was no longer just a success. I was a force, an empire built in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to announce its existence. The idea to attend Kasha's graduation didn't start as a plan for revenge. It began with a simple, unexpected email. As a former student of the university, even one who had dropped out, I was still on their alumni mailing list. An email newsletter arrived in my inbox one morning, cheerfully announcing the upcoming graduation ceremonies and celebrating the achievements of the graduating class. And there, front and center, was a picture of Kasha. She was being honored as the valedictorian of the law school, a pinnacle of achievement that my parents had likely dreamed of since she was a child. The newsletter mentioned a lavish celebration to be held at a 5-star hotel downtown, hosted by the university's dean and sponsored by several prominent law firms. Reading the announcement, I didn't feel anger or jealousy. I felt nothing, a strange, calm detachment. Her success was hers, and it had no bearing on my life. But as I scrolled through the details of the event, a thought began to form, a tiny seed of an idea that was less about vengeance and more about closure. For 8 years, I had allowed them to define my narrative in their world. I was the failure, the dropout, the family shame. They had written me out of their story so completely that I had ceased to exist. What if I were to write myself back in? Not as the person they cast out, but as the person I had become. The plan began to take shape, piece by piece, over the next few weeks. It wouldn't be enough to just show up. That would be seen as a desperate plea for attention from the black sheep of the family. My arrival had to be undeniable, irrefutable, and executed on a scale they couldn't possibly ignore or spin. It had to be a quiet earthquake that would shatter the foundations of their perfectly constructed world. My first step was to leverage my newfound resources. Through my company's philanthropic arm, I contacted the university's development office. Speaking as the anonymous head of a private foundation, I expressed an interest in making a substantial donation to the law school. The development officer, practically salivating at the prospect, was more than happy to help. I proposed the establishment of the Vance Family Foundation Grant, a full-ride scholarship to be awarded annually to a deserving student from an underprivileged background. I wanted the inaugural grant to be announced at the graduation celebration. The amount I pledged was staggering, enough to make the university administration weak at the knees. It was a figure that would guarantee me a place of honor at the event. The officer, a man named Mr. Peterson, was ecstatic. "This is one of the most generous donations we have ever received," he gushed. The Vance family must be incredibly proud of their daughter Kasia. We would be honored to have you and your family as special guests at the celebration. I smiled to myself. I will be attending, I said, my voice calm and professional. However, I must insist on one condition. The identity of the foundation's founder is to remain a complete secret until the official announcement during the dean's speech. I prefer to avoid any fuss. Mr. Peterson, eager to please a donor of this magnitude, readily agreed. The trap was set. The gilded invitation wasn't from them to me, it was from me to them, and they had no idea they were the guests of honor at their own downfall. Next, I focused on my appearance. My mother had weaponized my looks against me, calling me ugly as her final, cutting blow. My transformation couldn't be just about wealth, it had to be a visual repudiation of her judgment. I didn't want to look like a stranger, I wanted to look like a version of myself she had never believed possible. I hired one of the top stylists in the city, the kind who worked with celebrities for red carpet events. I didn't ask for a flashy, over-the-top makeover, I asked for power. We chose a custom-made suit, not a dress. It was a deep emerald green, tailored to perfection, exuding an aura of quiet confidence and authority. My hair, once an untamed, frizzy mane, was styled into a sleek, elegant cut. My makeup was minimal but flawless, highlighting the features my mother had always criticized. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman I had become, strong, self-possessed, and utterly in control. The timid, heartbroken girl who had fled that house 8 years ago was gone. The final piece of the plan involved Grandma June. I called her and told her I was coming to town for a business trip and wanted to take her out to dinner on the night of Kasia's graduation. I didn't mention the party. "Oh, Starlight, I'd love that," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "But are you sure? You know what night that is. I wouldn't want you to be upset." "I won't be upset, Grandma," I assured her. "I promise. I'll book a table at the nicest restaurant in town." We have a lot to celebrate. My celebration, however, would be a bit different than the one my family was planning. In the days leading up to the event, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I wasn't nervous or filled with vengeful glee. I felt like an architect reviewing the blueprints for a building she was about to complete. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every contingency considered. My family, in their arrogance, would never see it coming. They believed I had disappeared into a miserable, failed existence. They had crafted a comfortable narrative where they were the heroes, and I was the cautionary tale. They had no idea that I had spent the last 8 years building an empire, not of bricks and mortar, but of resilience, determination, and success so profound it would be like a foreign language to them. The gilded invitation was my RSVP to a party I was never invited to, and I was about to become the event's most unforgettable guest. The ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel was a sea of self-congratulation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over hundreds of guests dressed in their finest attire. The air hummed with the sound of polite laughter, clinking champagne glasses, and conversations about summer clerkships at prestigious firms. It was the exact kind of event my mother lived for, a perfect stage to display her perfect family. I paused at the entrance, taking a moment to observe the scene. I saw them holding court near the front of the room, a perfect tableau of success. My mother, in a shimmering silver gown, looked radiant. My father stood beside her, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed. And Kasia, the star of the evening, was glowing in a white dress, surrounded by a circle of admirers, accepting compliments with a practiced, modest smile. My arrival went unnoticed at first. I was just another face in the crowd. I accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter and made my way to the table reserved for the dean and his special guests. Mr. Peterson, the development officer, spotted me immediately and rushed over, his face beaming. "You made it! We are so thrilled to have you here tonight," he said, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "The dean is very excited to meet you." He led me to the head table, where I was introduced to Dean Miller, a distinguished man in his 60s. He was charming and effusive in his gratitude for the foundation's donation. No one questioned who I was. My presence at that table, in this suit, with this aura of quiet authority, was enough. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of my family. It was Kasia who saw me first. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a fleeting moment, they passed over me without recognition. Then she did a double take. Her smile faltered, and a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion washed over her face. She nudged my mother, whispering something in her ear while subtly pointing in my direction. My mother followed her gaze, and her perfectly composed expression froze. The wine glass in her hand paused halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a flash of pure, undiluted rage. My father saw it a moment later, his face paling as if he'd seen a ghost. And in a way, he had. The ghost of the daughter they had buried 8 years ago was sitting at the head table, chatting politely with the dean of the law school. The whispers started almost immediately. Guests at nearby tables began to notice the Vance family's strange, fixed stares. They followed their line of sight to me, a woman who looked vaguely familiar but was clearly someone of importance. I could feel their curiosity, a ripple of intrigue spreading through the room. I ignored them all, focusing my attention on my conversation with the dean, though I was acutely aware of the 3 pairs of eyes burning a hole into the side of my head. The moment of confrontation came during a lull in the program. My mother, unable to contain herself any longer, broke away from her group and marched toward my table. Kasia and my father followed a few steps behind, looking deeply uncomfortable. She stopped in front of me, her face a mask of fury. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous so as not to cause a scene. "You are not welcome here. This is a private event." Dean Miller and Mr. Peterson looked on, confused by the woman's hostility toward their guest of honor. I looked up at my mother, my expression calm and neutral. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice even. "It's been a long time." "Don't you mother me," she spat. "Who do you think you are, crashing Kasia's celebration dressed in that costume? Did you come here to beg for money, to ruin our night with your presence?" Before I could reply, the dean, ever the diplomat, stood up. "Meredith, is there a problem? This is our honored guest for the evening." My mother scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Honored guest? This is my daughter, Alara, the one who dropped out of college, the one who threw her life away. She has no business being here." A collective gasp went through the nearby tables as people put the pieces together. The family shame, the dropout daughter, was this poised woman in the power suit? It didn't make sense. I finally stood up, meeting my mother's furious gaze without flinching. "You're right," I said, my voice clear and carrying to the listening ears around us. "I am a college dropout, but I didn't throw my life away. I built one." Just then, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and Dean Miller was called to the stage to give his keynote address. My mother was forced to retreat to her table, her face thunderous. The show was about to begin. The dean spoke for several minutes, praising the graduating class and their bright futures. Then, he transitioned to the evening's special announcement. "Tonight, we are honored to announce the establishment of a new, transformative scholarship," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "The Vance Family Foundation grant will provide a full-ride scholarship each year to a student who has overcome significant adversity." He paused, letting the name sink in. I watched my family. My mother and Kasia exchanged a confused but proud look. They clearly assumed some distant, wealthy relative had made the donation in their honor. They preened, accepting the impressed glances from those around them. "This incredibly generous endowment," the dean continued, "is the single largest donation from an individual alumnus in this university's history. It was made possible by the foundation's founder, a person whose journey embodies the very spirit of resilience this grant seeks to honor. She is a true inspiration, a self-made entrepreneur who built a multi-million-dollar empire from the ground up. It is my distinct honor to introduce you all to the founder of the Vance Family Foundation, Ms. Alara Vance." He gestured directly at me. A spotlight hit our table. A polite, then thunderous, applause filled the room. The silence from my family's table was deafening. The color drained from my mother's face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled shade of gray. Kasia's jaw was literally hanging open, her valedictorian smile gone, replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief. My father looked like he was about to be sick. I gave a small, polite nod to the dean and the cheering crowd. I didn't go to the stage. I didn't need to. My work was done. The ghost had not only come to the party, she had bought the whole venue. The confrontation wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet, public, and absolutely devastating. Their narrative, the one they had so carefully crafted for 8 years, had just been obliterated in front of everyone they had ever wanted to impress. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze. As soon as the dean's speech concluded, my family became the unwilling center of attention. People weren't congratulating Kasia on her valedictorian status anymore. They were staring, whispering, and trying to comprehend the bombshell that had just been dropped. My mother, Kasia, and my father were trapped, forced to sit through the rest off the ceremony under the weight of hundreds of curious and pitying eyes. They couldn't leave without causing an even bigger scene. I saw my mother attempt a pained, tight-lipped smile, but it looked more like a grimace. Kasia just stared blankly at her dessert plate, her perfect night in absolute ruins. I didn't stay long. I had achieved what I came for. I politely excused myself from the head table, shook Dean Miller's hand one last time, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see their faces to know the extent of the damage. The truth was a far more powerful weapon than any angry words could ever be. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, a sleek, dark Tesla that was a far cry from the beat-up sedan I had fled in, my phone began to vibrate. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail. A text message immediately followed. It was from my mother. "We need to talk, call me, now." Another one followed a minute later, this one from Kasia. "What was that? How could you do that to me?" I read the messages, felt a flicker of the old pain, and then deleted them both without replying. The next morning, the floodgates opened. My phone was inundated with calls and texts from all three of them. My father's message was pleading. "Elara, please, your mother is distraught. Let's just talk." My mother's tone had shifted from demanding to manipulative. "I don't know what game you're playing, but a family is a family. After all we did for you, this is how you repay us. We can fix this." Kasia's was a mixture of outrage and entitlement. "You completely humiliated me. You owe me an apology and an explanation. People are saying you're a millionaire. Is that true?" Their attempts to reconnect were so transparently self-serving it was almost comical. For 8 years, I hadn't existed. Now that I had money and status, I was suddenly family again. They weren't reaching out to the daughter or sister they had hurt. They were reaching out to the millionaire who had embarrassed them. They didn't want to fix the relationship. They wanted to control the narrative and, no doubt, get access to my resources. I drafted a single, final response and sent it as a group text to all three of them. "For 8 years, you made it clear that I was not part of your family. You cut me off, erased me, and were content to believe I had failed. The person I am today was built not just without your help, but in spite of your cruelty. My success is my own, and it is not a commodity for you to claim now that it's convenient. Your pride was more important to you than your daughter, so please, hold on to it. It's all you have left of me. Do not contact me again." I blocked their numbers. Then I called my lawyer and had a cease and desist letter sent to their address, making it legally clear that any further contact would be considered harassment. It felt cold, clinical, and absolutely necessary. I was amputating a limb that had become toxic and infected. It was painful, but it was the only way to save the rest of me. My final act was for Grandma June. I had dinner with her the following night as promised. I picked her up and took her to the city's most exclusive restaurant. She had already heard whispers of what had happened, and when she saw me, she just hugged me tightly for a long time. "Oh, Starlight," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you." Over dinner, I finally told her everything. The whole story of Aura, the struggles, the successes, the full extent of my wealth. I also told her about the scholarship. She listened, her eyes shining with tears. At the end of the meal, I slid a small, velvet box across the table. Inside was not a piece of jewelry, but a set of keys. "What's this?" she asked, confused. "It's your new house, Grandma," I said softly. It's a beautiful little cottage with a big garden just a few blocks from my apartment. You won't have to climb those stairs in your old building anymore. And I've hired a full-time gardener to help you with your plants." She looked at me, speechless, tears streaming down her face. "Ilara, you don't have to do this." "I know," I said, taking her hand. "I want to. You were the only one who ever believed in me. You were my family when I had none. Let me take care of you now." In the end, my revenge wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about my own liberation. It was about proving to myself that their definition of me was wrong. My worth was never tied to their approval, their chosen career path, or their narrow standards of beauty. My fortune wasn't just the money in my bank account. It was the peace I felt in my quiet apartment, the loyalty of my team at Aura, and the love of the one family member who had always seen my light. I had built an empire not on a desire for vengeance, but on the scraps of a life they had thrown away. And in doing so, I had finally, truly, become my own masterpiece.